Well, we're live. I don't hear any music yet, but that's okay. um, we we might be live right now, and when we are live, and everybody's like, we're waiting for some cool music and stuff like this.
Can't start without the cool music, man.
Well, you know what? You see, maybe see if we get a couple more seconds here. Maybe we have to do a restart. Sorry about that, everybody. Come on, you got to give us a break. This is it's our first show together, right? Isn't that, Joe?
Technically, it's our third together.
So okay, it's our
There we go. Here we go.
So yeah, so today, oh my gosh, we're going to be delving into some political side of the current issue facing our nation, police brutality, diversity, some socioeconomic issues. And so I'm Todd DeVoe.
And I'm Joe Matthews.
And we are the host of the OC Politics Show. And we have a lot to discuss today. We do, Joseph, don't we? We've been watching the protest unfold over the last 3 or 4 days here.
5 days now. It's actually 5 days.
5 days of protest. I know that's been a bit since we
since the 25th.
Is that when the video dropped? When we saw the video, you know, it's amazing to see how quick things moved once everybody saw the video of George Floyd basically being murdered live, you know, or at least recorded right there in broad daylight. And you know, I know that the city and the DA over there in Minneapolis moved quickly to fire and then arrest the officer that was involved, and protests broke out, and we went from there into civil unrest, if you will. So, you know, Joe, like I said, we've been talking about these things shaking out since it broke out. So tell me what's going on and what's your opinion on these things.
You know, my 16-year-old son came into my room and asked me to fill out a Black Lives Matter petition because he felt so strongly about how badly things are, and he's scared. He's really genuinely scared about what's going on around him, especially when you add in the COVID stuff. It's just a pressure cooker of craziness that's going on all at the same time, and it's just amazing. Not amazing, but I guess amazing is a word because I've never seen us go through all of this all at once in such a way that it's collectively very scary for everyone.
Yeah, I think amazing is definitely the word to use, and unprecedented for sure, right? I mean,
unprecedented, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we're sitting here, you know, in COVID shutdown, lockdown. We have people losing their jobs, and I hate to see when they sort of comparison the police action taken amongst one action of protesters and the other. I even if I this is something even if I don't agree with the political stance that somebody's doing, whether it's the Black Lives Matter, whether it's the I don't even know if they had a name. The group of people that were protesting in Michigan, you know, with the "give us our jobs back" type thing, doesn't make a difference. Whatever side of the spectrum you're on, you have the right, but in the Constitution, to protest your government and to bring grievances. Now, I know the people on the left were really upset that the Michigan State Police didn't do anything because there's a bunch of dudes running around with unloaded, well, look, assumingly so, look like they were unloaded firearms, right? You can't always assume, right? We treat them all like they're right, running around either way, right? But they were definitely not violent, right? They were just projecting, I suppose. And then you have
projecting violence. Projecting violence.
I don't know. I don't know. How do you project violence, right? You project
I'm
strength.
scared. If there's a guy with a gun in his hand, I'm worried.
Well,
I feel fearful.
Yeah, but okay. So, but if you're walking through the woods during hunting season, there's people with loaded weapons running all over.
Then let's kill Bambi. Yeah,
right. You know what I mean. So I mean that's just because I think it's. I mean, I guess the difference is because a guy being in the military and we run around with, you know, big weapons all the time. You know, unless the person behind that weapon has bad intentions, It doesn't really bother me. So you know what I mean. So there's that, right? So the point is that we have groups of people, left and right, that have grievances with the nation, and we've gone to protests. And I think the difference between what's going on right now is that we have, with this particular situation going on, right? And let me recap this really quick. So there's been a lot of stuff going on. So George Floyd was murdered, right? And I don't think anybody here will disagree with the fact that he was murdered by the police officer. The officer has been arrested and charged with murder three, which is basically homicide. Um, and then protests have sprung all over the nation. But then there's also been violence springing all over the nation, which I think I want to separate them between the violent actions of the looters and stuff that we're seeing here in Southern California, um, with the actions of the protests. I really think that they are bifurcated. Do you agree with that, or do you think I'm wrong?
No, I totally agree with you. I think we're losing focus, and that happens every time this happens, where we do get a protest, and then there's the looting, and then everyone focuses on the looting, and then we forget why they're protesting in the first place, and we go back to square one again. And then 5 years later go by, and then boom, we have another man get killed, and then another situation happens, and then it keeps cycling and cycling and cycling, and history is repeating itself. This is 1992. I was what we were young little studs back then, but it was the same. It's the same exact story, exactly same story.
No, you're right, in a sense. But I think in this one here, I think the onion layer specifically in 2020 is, a few months ago we had a shooting of a young man, who was running through his neighborhood, and that was by two civilian people that took the law upon themselves. For whether or not they thought that guy was actually robbing stuff, that's besides the point, you know. But they took the law upon themselves to shoot somebody. Um, you
Looking
know,
into the windows of the house.
that's what they're saying, right? And
Yeah,
then
the guy's taking a jog.
and then a white dude in Dallas last year in 2019, Tony Timpia, was killed the same way that George Floyd was killed, right? Basically, and there's a thing. It's called positional asphyxia, and this is the reason why in Orange County, or not in Orange County, in California, you are no longer allowed to hog tie suspects, right? Even if they're combative. As soon as they're under control, you have to sit them up or put them on their back, right?
Mm.
Um, so I don't know what the situation was going on over in in Minneapolis. I don't want to pretend to know everything that's going on over there. I can't tell you that. I can tell you that you know there's other things, I guess, that could contribute to the reason why when they're in that position they die. But regardless, once you are in custody, it's the responsibility of that agency, of those law enforcement officers, to um, protect you, right? Even if they're protecting you from yourself. So I think they failed completely on that, and keeping your knee on that guy's neck. I don't understand what was going on, why they felt they couldn't control him, and they ended up killing him. And so whether the intent was there or not, the actions created that. So that's why the homicide
Eight,
charges were brought up.
8.5 minutes on his neck.
Yeah,
8.5 minutes. It's a long
yeah.
time.
At the Tony
It's like choking
Tempia's.
somebody.
Oh yeah, it was. Yeah. Well, in the Tony Tempia issue, I think it was like 17 minutes that they're on the guy laying on him.
Yeah.
So, Joe, what are the
And let's
issues?
just stress. I
Go
was
ahead.
going to say we should stress that with Tony. Tony had some mental health issues, and he was scared of the police, and he told them he was scared, and they laughed at him. So this the conduct of law enforcement is disappointing, at least in
Yeah,
some
and
situations, right?
absolutely no. And I with the Tony Tempia story, which is interesting that it didn't get out. Um, they were laughing at him. Then they thought he was asleep. They were like, "Get up for school, Tony," and they were kind of mocking him a little bit. And then when they picked him up, the one officer, I think he realized, oh crap, he's not breathing, and he goes, I hope didn't kill him, and then I hope we didn't kill him, and one of the officers starts laughing, go, we? Do you have a mask in your pocket? Ha 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 ha. They load him in
Mhm.
the back of the ambulance, and the paramedic looks at the coppers and goes, hey, he's dead. You know,
Yeah.
um, uh, so I don't know if it's, and this kind of brings us to the greater point, right? Have we gone to a point where, and I know we want to talk about the thin blue line flag, which the reason for the thin blue line flag was originally started to, intended for the fallen officers, right? And I know that has kind of been picked up, but have we gone to the point of the thin blue line to where there is a demarcated them and us generally?
I think it's hazy everywhere you go. I mean, you had a lot of law enforcement agencies come out, you know, just denouncing what had happened, and then you have agencies that aren't saying a word. You have our president who's not really saying a word about, he's saying it's sad, and that's just about it. So I think people are fed up. I think there's good police officers out there that are just sorry that they're in this position where they're representing certain agencies that are doing bad things.
Is there a general mistrust of our criminal justice system and the legal system today?
I don't think you'd be having the protesting, rioting, and civil unrest unless people felt that the criminal justice system was unfair. This is an accumulative effect that, from a social science perspective, you can see people are angry and they're frustrated, and they're taking this out on their own backyards out of just pure frustration and being backed up against a wall. And I was listening to a psychologist this morning talk about why 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 we're doing what we're doing, and it's like we tried voting, and voting's not working. People are still getting killed. We tried to have open dialogue and have people have camps and seminars to get people together, and they're not working. Legislation's not working. So what do you have that's left? You know, this is the only way people are getting the attention the subject matter deserves. I mean, there's looting, yeah, but really, it's the protests are about police brutality.
Yeah, and like I said, I definitely believe there's a bifurcation between the looting and the mess that's happening in the
Definitely.
evening. It's interesting because like what I've seen is law enforcement comes out, they say, hey, this is an unlawful assembly or whatever, and they give the order, and then say go home, and they give it time, and an hour later, maybe less, the people who are left over pretty much are the ones are going to cause the issues at night.
Yeah.
Um,
There's definitely a night
and
shift and a day shift. I said
yeah,
there's definitely a night shift and a day shift, right?
yeah, for sure. And the funny thing is the people during the daytime, they're peaceful. They have a message to say. Black Lives Matter are out there doing their thing. The kind of running this whole thing, regardless. Say his name, do kneel down. You've actually seen some police departments that participate in the sense where they kneel with them. Where they go, we know this is
Flint,
wrong. Yeah.
Flint, Michigan. They were walking alongside of them instead of blocking them. You know, in their protests, they walked alongside of them in brotherhood and sisterhood and that's noble. That kind of the way it should be done. Now it's a militaristic approach to every single crowd of people that shows up when they have every right to protest. They have a constitutional right to stand there and protest, and instead they're greeted by the welcoming committee, which is baton bats and helmets and tear gas.
Yes.
That's during
Absolutely.
the day. That's during the day shift. They're already ready to go already during the day, let alone
Hmm.
the night shift.
You know, um, we talked about the thin blue line flag, and every year this is also the same week as the police officer, fallen officer memorial services. And in Santa Ana, the Orange County Sheriff's Department, they raised the thin blue flag underneath the American flag for the fallen officers, and which which caused a lot of well, not a lot, but at least definitely some questioning of the timing on it, which it's unfortunate for the timing on it, but they do it every year. But this question of the timing on it and questioning of the fact of is Sheriff Barnes tone deaf to the situations that are going on now?
Well, let's give a little context too. You know,
Sure.
they the the white supremacist groups in Charlotte were waving the exact same flag to kind of protest, to be a counter to Black Lives Matter. So now that's a symbol, to different people meaning different things. And so it's getting muddled again, what the true intention of the flag is for. And now Barnes is in trouble for it. And he shouldn't be, because he's just doing what he does every year. Whereas there's a perceived notion of insensitivity that this is not the year to raise that particular flag.
I have a problem with that sensitivity, if you will, and the reason why I'm saying this is like flags. They have yes, they have meaning, and that's why they're there, right? The banners, if you will, right? We stand up and we pledge allegiance to the American flag. um it's flown over all of our buildings, and you'll have people, Americans, all right, that will say, "Oh, we should not fly the flag. The American flag is offensive to others that come to our nation," right? And it doesn't make sense, right? It's the flag of our nation. Um, if the American flag is offending people, screw them. This is our flag, and we're going to fly it. And then like like you can say the same for other flags, right? You take a look at the communist flag, which that represents. You take a look at you take a look at the Mexican flag, for instance, and La Raza, which is a racist organization, right? They fly the Mexican flag, and it is, they're the race. That's what La Raza means. Um,
Right.
so I mean, like because somebody co-ops that flag, does that change the meaning of it?
Uh, I can, that's a tough question. Just people feel strongly about their symbols and their flags, and you can't take it personally, right? If someone wants to use it in a different kind of way, because you have no control. You have no control how groups of people are going to identify with a particular image and how they run with it. We can't do anything about the Confederates, but yet the Confederate flag is a powerful symbol that people are drawn to and use to justify some of their actions.
Well, and that's if we talk about tribalism and the flags and the Confederate flag specifically, I mean I want to say that's a different story, because I mean that flag was used against the North, right? They wanted to separate. They wanted to become separate, right? And that flag was the flag that they waved during a battle against. We've lost men, both what I mean, and women for that matter, but we lost men. With people flying that flag, right?
But they were a nation. They were a developed nation that was fighting, to them, a
To
different
them,
nation.
right?
So it's so historical
Right,
context is
right. But if you take a look at the thin blue line
what
flag,
it's used for now.
I mean, if you think
Yeah,
about this though, I mean, like you take the thin blue line flag, and now they have like the red line that they do for firefighters. They have green. I don't know what the green stands for. Anyway, but they have the green on there too. I think it's whatever, a dispatch or something like that. Anyway, they put the different color thin lines on there to represent public safety organizations. It's become more of a public safety flag, and I think that with somebody who is using that flag inappropriately, I'm going to say that it's become a symbol of hate. I mean, I think about those kids. We talked about this the other day, Joe, where they run around wearing the um, the Che Guevara shirt, right? And I mean, like Che Guevara is not a nice person. I mean, he's a racist. He's anti-gay. It's in his writings, by the way. He put people in concentration camps. He's murdered, you know, hundreds of thousands of people, right? Um, you know, you got that going on. Yet that seems to be an accepted sim image for the people on the left, right? You know, so
Yeah.
go ahead. No, go.
No, I was just gonna say it's a symbol of revolution, and young people are attracted to revolutionaries, so they kind of gleam over the realities of these historical figures that have done some damage, and yet they still put a sticker on the back of their moped that makes them feel proud that they got Che on the back of their, you know.
Right. But then you take a look at the historic of the Gadsden flag, which is the yellow flag with a snake on it. Don't tread on me. Um, that was originally the Marine Corps flag, right? So there's a very that has a lot of historical context for the United States Marine Corps. Yet again, that's been co-opted by the alt right, if you will. And now people say, oh, if you had that flag on your car, you're automatically racist without knowing the historical context of it. So, the reason why we're bringing up this stuff by everybody, because we're just talking about images in general. Um, so it goes back to tribalism, right? So we have our tribe, and I think we saw that play out yesterday in Huntington Beach, the idea of tribalism. Did you see that video in Huntington Beach yesterday, Joe?
No, I didn't.
All right, I'll describe it. In Huntington Beach, the Black Lives Matter protesters were on the beach side and of the PCH, right? They kind of gathered there, and as they were gathering on the business side, were by kind of like by Jack surfboards over that side of it on Main Street. Um, groups of residents met over there, and so it was two distinct groups, and in the middle there was law enforcement. And as the Black Lives Matter decided to push up Main Street, the group of residents started chanting, started chanting USA, USA. Then they started chanting Huntington Beach, or in the Not Our Beach, and then Not Our Town, and all the different things against Black Lives Matter, pushing them back across the street and not allowing them to walk up Main Street, which, by the way, would go up to City Hall and the police station. I believe that's probably what their destination was. But they were, in their minds, the residents, if you hear them, they were protecting the stores because they were afraid of the looters, which I don't know. I can't say they wouldn't happen, but considering the fact of who was protesting, I don't think that they were intending to do any harm like that, but they may have. Um, so now you have, again, tribalism. You have my town against you. You have now a sides that are out there. You have the pro police side, if you will, versus the anti police side, if you will, and I'm generalizing these, like, probably more than that. You know, is this tribalism type stuff that has going on here? Is this going to cause more issues? Do you think along the line? Because I don't think these protests are going to be over anytime soon. I almost believe this is like the summer of '69.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree. I agree. Historically, this stuff doesn't go away in 5 days, and I think people are taking sides. This is how people take sides in the big rumble, and it's a much bigger rumble that is starting to form, and it's going to get worse during this election too. It's gonna really inflame these groups to get out there, hopefully to vote, but it's really gonna bring out the worst and the best of us with these groups of people and what they're fighting for.
I want to share a video, and I don't know if you guys are going to be able to hear this. I hope you can. Um, and um, let's see if I can do this right here, everybody. So, Joe, can you see my screen I'm sharing?
I can't see your screen. I just see you.
Let's see here. Um, let's see. And I apologize. I apologize for this. Oh, I'm gonna play it, and if you guys can't, I'll describe it too. So there's people that don't that aren't watching. There's a group, a bunch of police officers, or I think it's police. It might be National Guard. Running down the street, and there's a woman videotaping this on, and now they're telling them to go inside, go inside, go inside. Um, Now they light them up with paintballs, right? And they got to light them up, and they start shooting paintballs at them, and so then they run back inside, and this is um, this is the stuff that's going on necessarily with some actions with law enforcement, and there's been a lot of conversation of late of the idea of the militarization of law enforcement, and I know that you're kind of up on that. Let's discuss that for a couple seconds.
Yeah, I mean we're talking about the night shift and the day shift, and would have been appropriate for the day shift to get police that were just having their helmets off, their batons out of their hands, maybe attached to their belts, and just waiting for bad things to happen instead of preempting bad things to happen by coming off with just the sheer imagery of kind of a fascist kind of. It reminds me of World War II with Mussolini and the riot squads, and they're showing up to a peaceful protest. And how does that make that protester feel? And maybe that protester that you know wasn't as angry might be a little angrier because of the imagery that they're faced with, and they're scared, and they feel like they're going to get backed in a corner in some ways, and they don't feel safe. So what else are they going to do? What do you expect them to do? And then when you have a crowd of people all chanting the same thing, you know, it's a group. It's the pack mentality that takes over.
Well, okay, and I'll take the other side of that right now. So in Chicago, you see three police officers that um, basically got mobbed by the mob, right? They started pulling on them. Now, protesters came to protect those police officers, and there's been a few of those things that are happening too. And then in New York City, you've had two patrol cars that were surrounded by groups of people, and those patrol cars drove through that crowd after they're surrounded by them. You know, some two young girls. One was 27, I think. The other one was 19. Threw Molotov cocktails at a van full of police officers. You know, so there has been direct action against law enforcement by protesters. Um, you know, should should the police officers not protect themselves then?
No, I think they have every right to protect themselves. I just think that when I look at places like Flint, where they're reaching out their hands and saying, "Hey, let's walk down the street together. Let's protest together. Let's start this day off together." Uh, it's possible that law enforcement can facilitate a different kind of policy that makes it not so. Let's go into World War III as soon as we show up and say hello.
So yeah, I mean, I understand that what you're saying with that specifically with those tactics. What's the book that you were reading specifically talking about the militarization of law enforcement?
Well, I haven't been reading it, but but Radley Balco is a Washington Post reporter, and he wrote the book about the militarization of of the police. And I've heard the federal government years ago had a lot of surplus military equipment, and these local governments took advantage of that through grants, through Homeland Security grants, and that's where you get those big, huge anti-personnel carriers that carry in, police. But it's the same kind of craft that they use to storm, a hot military zone.
Mm. And do you think that the tactics, I suppose, that law enforcement using is more militarized than before. I mean,
Well,
are we moving away from that idea of the community policing? I guess my question.
I, I think the crowds are getting bigger, and I think they're getting angrier, and so they have no choice but to match fire with fire. So it makes sense that they do come out in bigger forces, that they do mutual aid and bring in other officers from other towns to help them control the situation, because these crowds are in the thousands. They're in the tens of thousands. So how do you control it before the whole town burns down? You know,
Yeah, it's funny. I was
it's
talking to Brian, and we're discussing the idea of why why don't police officers walk a beat anymore? Or they'll drive a beat, right? And it used to be in the old days that you'd see, like think about like the West Side Story, where the guy all
right.
the kids knew that officer, right, in the West Side Story, right, and they walked the beat, who they were, um, you know. I mean, if you think about New York City back in the old days, where they had their call boxes that they had to go to, you know, they they uh, they did that, and you know what? I mean, like when the officers were walking the beat in New York City back in the day, there wasn't necessarily a safe neighborhood, you know, it wasn't like in certain areas. But do you think there's a difference between, or do you think that if we get back to having officers walk beats in certain parts of town, especially like some of like the like say in Santa Ana, parts of Anaheim, maybe even like the beach areas of like Huntington Beach or whatnot. Do you think if we did have officers actually walking the beat, would there be less? I don't want to say less issues, but would there be less animosity towards law enforcement if they got to know the
It,
coppers?
uh, See, I think it's about the coppers. I think if you have some bad cops walking down the street, what's the point of walking down the street? They're creating more problems with their bad habits. Does that really help anybody? Just because you're changing the way you're deploying officers, when the police departments themselves have a systemic problem of racism and bad management and bad leadership. So to me, it doesn't matter whether you do that or not. If you don't take it at its core and get rid of the bad ones and promote the good ones, uh, I, I'd much rather not even see them on the street. You know what I mean? Because I'm afraid I'm going to be harassed for crossing the street, and then that can escalate to anything they want to escalate to because they're bad cops.
It that okay, so it kind of goes up to the perceptions of the media. Is there are there more bad apples in the cart, right? I mean, or is it that when there is that bad apple in the cart, the media picks up on it and says, why isn't law enforcement managing themselves?
All it took was one bad apple, and we have rioting in the streets all over the country. That's how important it is for us to flush these people out. It's because one can make a difference, even if it's in a bad way, right?
Well, yeah, no, I do agree with you in there. It's interesting on the Floyd video that, and I pointed this out before, that as he's sitting there, terrible. I mean, there's no excuse for what that officer did. But this is what I find interesting is that when the people are videotaping him, this one girl says, "This is what the whites do. This is what the whites do." Right, talking about him when he was killing Floyd. You know,
Mm.
so obviously that there's some racial tensions going on, specifically in Minneapolis, because that's where that was being said. I mean, I'm sure there's racial tensions going on with law enforcement around the country. Um, but is it that perception of this is what the whites do? Did does that fuel that fire? And is it because if it, going back to what William Randolph Hearst said, if it bleeds, it leads, right? I don't know if you said that directly, but with yellow journalism, um, you know, is that the truth? And I know the perception is true, right? Because you have to fight perception. But is that the truth, or is that just the perception that where, as law enforcement drives down the street, everybody's afraid of them? And specifically, and I understand, and I can't I can put myself in their shoes. I can empathize, but you talk about young black men driving in predominantly white neighborhoods such as Beverly Hills or whatever. I know that I've heard stories upon stories of where they're being pulled over, um, for no particular reason, I suppose. There's always going to be a reason, but I mean, I'm saying, in their mind, there's no particular reason. Um, what do you say on that? And what I mean by that, by the way, is like whether or not the officer's pulling a person over for being black in a white neighborhood, they're gonna have a probable cause to do so articulated. There's a book that's out called Three Felonies a Day. It talks about how everybody who's driving, doing whatever, are unknowingly committing 3 felonies a day, and uh, so there's that as well. Maybe we are over regulated and over too many.
Guilty.
Yeah, just just driving down the street, you're committing 3 felonies a day, whether it's speeding or whatever the situation is. But anyway, going back to that, um, I know that the experience for young black men being pulled over with the idea of you know what they feel, right? And again, I'm not value judging here. It's what the perception is, and maybe rightfully so. What they have to go through compared to, say, a white kid goes through when they get pulled over. Are these perceptions, is the media helping or hurting in this area?
Hmm. You know, black people are twice as likely as white people to be pulled over by law enforcement in a traffic stop. I mean, that's a well-researched kind of data point, and I think the media will take that and use it every single time a black man is shot or assaulted or mistreated by the police. Uh, it's the story. It's what uh, the media is going to follow what's hot. And right now, this is a topic, and it's always been hot every time it happens because it hits us at our core what the right thing to do is, and why we are treating our people the way we're treating them, and why humanity needs to do a better job.
Mm. Robert on Facebook, he points out that he goes, it's the attitude of the officers that makes a difference, and I think
Totally
you're
agree.
right. Yeah, I think you're right. I think sometimes when you uh yeah when that first interaction goes in, and I I think that my wife brought up this point. And she's a social worker and she works in some pretty rough neighborhoods of the east side of Los Angeles, Boyle Heights, East LA, those areas. And she was talking about how the fact that there are police officers that are out there that uh, need to be rotated out of the areas that they're working at and brought, because they're very crusty, they're very jaded. Um, they've seen a lot of bad stuff, and it gets to a point to where you see so much bad stuff that you look at everybody as being bad. And again, it goes back to that original conversation of that thin blue line of, if you're on the side of the line, you're good. If you're on that side of the line, you're bad. And the worst part about it is when some law enforcement officers try to police themselves, they get they get knocked in the head. I had acquaintance of mine who worked for LA County. I don't want to drop them out, but worked for an LA County police department. Saw some bad stuff. Reported it. He was actually a young gun, moving up the ranks. He's going through SWAT school, whatnot. And the minute that he brought up some impropriety that was happening within his agency. Next thing you know, he was out doing smoking tickets. No joking about that. His job was to patrol the street and stop people from smoking cigarettes in public. So it seems to be that there's that as well, and I don't know what the answer is. I really don't. We need police officers, right? At the end of the day, there's bad people that are out there doing really bad things. Um, we need to have them on our side, but we also need to have them. I don't know, Joe. You know, when you have bad people doing bad things, you need good people that can do good things, and the days of saying, hey, when you have a problem, Joe, go talk to law enforcement, and next thing you know, you're reporting a problem to law enforcement, and then you end up being arrested,
handcuffed. Yeah.
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 So
It's sad. It
I,
happens all the time. And when it
I
does happen, it's amazing that it does happen.
it does. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for sticking with us a little bit over that 30-minute mark. It's always a pleasure to have you all here. This is a tough issue, and it is definitely a conversation that we need to have. So from Brian, Brian, our producer, thanks for Brian for being here. Joe, my co-host, are here. For those of us at the OC Politics Show, stay safe, everybody, and we'll see you next week.